APUSH. We have been talking about the 1960s this week, and we haven't really been talking this week. You guys have been doing a lot of kind of independent research this week. You looked at LBJ's war on poverty programs at the beginning of the week, and then you also looked at sort of the 1960s reform movements that have characterized the 1960s. Last week, we looked at the civil rights movement, which is definitely a part of the 1960s, as well as the Kennedy presidency. So we've been kind of talking about the 60s for the last week and a half or so. Today we get into Vietnam, which starts kind of at the tail end of the 1960s and is going to go into the 1970s, but has long-lasting effects even beyond that. But of course, like most things, in order to understand the Vietnam War and how it gets its start, we have to go back even farther than the 1960s because everything has its groundwork, in history, way before. So we actually have to go way, way far back to imperialism. Okay, so in the 1800s, you have, the age of imperialism, where you have the Europeans and America kind of scrambling for territory around the world. The French actually claim Vietnam in the 1800s, but they don't just claim the country of Vietnam. Remember, there's no real borders of Vietnam at this time. It's just big regions in Southeast Asia. So the French Empire over there is an area called Indochina, and it basically is made up of Vietnam, but also of Cambodia and Laos. So you can see it on the map on your PowerPoint. It's a really big region in Southeast Asia. And again, this whole region is owned, occupied by the French. Okay. Now, after World War II, we talked about how the world goes through a period called decolonization, where the Europeans and the Americans attempt to let go of their colonies and decolonize the world because they realize, oh, we just fought this war against Hitler and fighting for the independence and democracy of the world. We should probably let go of our colonies too. And so they attempt to do that. Now, decolonization is kind of two-part. On one hand, you do have some of the Europeans letting go of their colonies willingly. On the other hand, you have some colonies trying to gain their independence through revolutions. Vietnam is one of those. And so after World War II, you have a communist leader, a communist revolutionary named Ho Chi Minh. Super important name. If you're taking notes, write it down, circle it on your note sheet if you printed it out. Ho Chi Minh, he basically sets out to liberate Vietnam from France. Okay, now this is in the context of the beginning of the Cold War. Remember, we've already had the Truman Doctrine, we've already talked about the containment policy. All of that is still in effect. So here's America, kind of sit back, watching this happen over in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam. The French are fighting, they're trying to maintain their power over there, and America has a choice to make. Now, normally, we would help the underdog, right? But this is tricky because if we help the underdog over in Vietnam, that means we're supporting Ho Chi Minh. Can we do that? No, because he's a communist and we have the Truman Doctrine and containment in play. So instead of helping Ho Chi Minh and the revolutionaries, Truman, like in Greece, like in Turkey, like in Western Europe, like everywhere, he just starts throwing billions of dollars at France and saying, please win this war so you don't have communism spreading into this region, okay? So we're sending billions of dollars over to France, not only to help them rebuild after World War II, but to help them fight over in Vietnam as well. Okay, now eventually Truman leaves and you get the President Eisenhower, and he kind of takes over this role. We are still spending money helping France fight in Vietnam, trying to maintain control. Okay, now eventually, there's so much money going on, like trading hands over there, that you have to kind of develop a justification for this. So Eisenhower, he believes in something called the Domino Theory, another term that you really want to know. Domino Theory is that basically, like dominoes, if one falls, the rest fall. Okay, so Indochina, or this area of Southeast Asia, all the countries are brand new and they're all kind of tight together in that region. And so Eisenhower is saying, listen, if we lose Vietnam and they fall to communism, Laos, Cambodia, all of the surrounding areas are also going to fall to communism. And before you know it, we've lost the whole region, and we just can't afford that. So this provides the justification of sending money and later troops over to protect Vietnam. Okay, now in 1954, Ho Chi Minh's armies, they've basically taken control of major French garrisons. There's like this 55-day siege. They kill like 15,000 people. And so Ho Chi Minh has essentially won this thing. And this makes America panic because they know this is kind of on the verge of turning in Ho Chi Minh's favor. we need to act more aggressively. And so we call together something called the Geneva Accords. And we meet in Geneva, we meet in Switzerland. France basically at this convention says, okay, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, you are independent. We are letting you go, okay? But we're going to, like we've done in Korea and now in Germany, it's our favorite thing to do, we're going to split Vietnam for just a year, okay? Now this is important. We're going to split Vietnam for just a year. In the north, Ho Chi Minh, you rule that area. It can be communist, it can be whatever you want. In the south, we're going to support democracy and capitalism. It's going to basically be run and supported by the United States. But again, only for about a year, because in 1956, they were going to let elections be held, and then Vietnam would decide through a democratic process whether or not they wanted to be communist like the North or a democracy like the South. Now, the rationale is that after a year of living this way, that the Vietnamese would see that comparison between communism in the North and democracy in the South, and that when they voted, it would be a no-brainer. They would vote for democracy and everything would be fine. Communism would be contained, okay? That's the theory, but we're going to see that it doesn't actually turn out that way, okay? Now, the United States tries to lay a little bit more groundwork to make sure that when these elections are held in 1956, that it will, in fact, go in the favor of democracy. So in 1954, the United States forms the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which the goal of this organization is to pull in other countries and try to form an alliance under the guise of democracy, okay? We also start putting tons of money towards improving South Vietnam, and by doing that, we basically are supporting the new government, who is led by a guy named Diem, okay? Now, this guy he's trouble. He's really not great. He is corrupt, he's inefficient, he has all these scandals, but he's a democratic leader, and the U.S. backs him, okay? Now, eventually, the people turn against Diem because they know he's terrible, okay? So in 1957, there is a communist rebel group in South Vietnam that's just had it with Diem, and so they decide, this National Liberation Front group, we call them the NLF, that they are basically going to get rid of Diem, they're going to stage a coup, get rid of him, and they're going to unite North Vietnam with South Vietnam and just kind of excuse the United States and these elections out of it. They're just going to do it through this military coup, okay? And so you do have these like sporadic attacks starting throughout the South, okay? Now, because you have these sporadic attacks happening, the U.S. gets nervous that the region is becoming unstable. What do we do when we fear that a region is becoming unstable? We send in troops. So again, we start with money, but this is quickly going to become troops. This initiative is led by President Kennedy. He's the first one that starts sending in special forces into South Vietnam to try to stabilize the region. Now remember, there are troops here, but there's no war declared. There's no Vietnam War yet. Okay, so before the war is even declared, about 5 years before, by 1963, there's already 15,000 American troops stationed in Vietnam, just kind of keeping order and peace. So that's a lot of troops to station over in basically a peacetime situation. It's going to lead to a war, kind of evolving very quickly because there's already so many troops stationed over there. Okay, so how does the war actually start? In the 1960s, again, we're sending over all these troops, and they're going on these big warships or battleships. Okay, so one of the warships that we send over there is called the Uss Maddox. Another, term you want to circle, underline, remember. And basically, the Maddox is at port in the Gulf of Tonkin, okay, which is like the port right off of the coastline of Vietnam. And so it's just kind of, it's chilling there, and the troops are kind of going off and on. And then all of a sudden, it's torpedoed, okay? And it's clear that it was the North Vietnamese. Listen, they don't even hit the boat. Like, they torpedo towards the Maddox, attempting to attack it, but it misses. It doesn't even hit the boat, okay? But it's enough. I mean, remember, we have a long history. Don't hit our boats, right? Lusitania, the USS Maine. I mean, the U.S. does not like when people try to mess with our big boats. And so this is another example of that. President Johnson at the time gets up in front of Congress and says, guess what the North Vietnamese did? They acted aggressively towards us. They tried to hit our big boat, the USS Maddox. We have to take out our revenge, okay? Now, this is so important, okay? Kennedy launches an airstrike, or not Kennedy, sorry, Johnson, R.I.P. Kennedy. He launches an airstrike against North Vietnam in retaliation for the Maddox, but then he asks Congress to basically declare war. Now, this is important and why Vietnam remains to this day very controversial. Okay, Congress has the power to declare war. That is their constitutional ability, right? But in this case, in Vietnam, Congress never actually issues a declaration of war. Instead, Congress passes something called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which basically authorizes President Johnson, LBJ, to take, and I'm going to read this off my screen so I get it right, take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. Now, what does that mean? It's basically a blank check for LBJ. Congress is saying, listen, you can do whatever you feel like is necessary to protect the United States if you feel like we are under the threat of an attack from North Vietnam. Now, obviously, LBJ feels like we're under attack because they tried to hit the Maddox, right? We already have 15,000 troops, by this time even more, stationed over there, which started back with Kennedy in the early 1960s. So by the time the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution gets passed, we're actually like already in a war. You already got troops over there. You already have an act of aggression against the USS Maddox. And so very quickly, even without that official declaration of war coming out of Congress, you basically have the start of what we call the Vietnam War. The significance of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution is that it gives Johnson wartime powers and the ability to send troops to Vietnam, again, without that constitutional declaration of war to justify his actions. Now, eventually, we're going to see that after the Vietnam War is said and done, once it's over, that Congress does try to kind of undo that because we don't want presidents to be able to just go and make war whenever they feel like it's necessary. We want to honor that constitutional power that only Congress has. And so we do try to kind of undo this a little bit after Vietnam, but it sets a really important precedent that we see even later being enacted in like the Iraq War, for instance, in the early 2000s after 9/11. Technically, George W. Bush did not have a declaration of war to go over to Iraq or to Afghanistan. He relied largely on the precedent that was set here in Vietnam with this Gulf of Tonkin resolution. So that is the beginning of the Vietnam War. We're going to talk about it a little bit more later this week and talk about how it kind of takes a turn. Everybody's in support in the beginning, but we know that it doesn't end up that way. So we're going to kind of talk about how it transforms and evolves later this week. So I hope you guys are doing well. Wash your hands, and I will see you back here on Friday.